If you're concerned about your posture and you believe that it's all about just standing up straighter, you're going to want to watch this. So here's a picture of the complexity of posture. And it's not just as simple as standing up straight. If it were, everybody would have perfect posture, or anybody who cared about posture would have perfect posture, and nobody would complain, and you wouldn't be worrying, what do I have to stretch? What do I have to strengthen? Do I need to see an expert? That kind of thing. So I'm not going to go into great detail. I try to keep these videos relatively short. So, but you can see here, you've got this balance of muscles on either side of the spine. So here's the front, the neck flexors, the back is the neck extensors. You've got your upper back here, and I'm going to show you a curvature of the spine in a moment. And you've got all of these back muscles here, these back extensors, right? Upper and lower. And then when we get down into the pelvis, we've got the abdominals here, just above the pelvis, going down into the hip flexors, your psoas muscles. I don't really call them iliopsoas because there's an iliacus and there's a psoas major and a psoas minor. It's iliopsoas isn't really accurate. And then your iliacus muscle is here. You've got your tensor fascia latae. You've got your rectus femoris, which is, quads. And then we've got the backside. You've got your hip extensors. You've got your gluteus maximus. Max is your power source, right? You've heard me. If you've watched any of my videos, you've heard that. And then the hamstrings, which is controlling, when you bend forward and when you sit and those kind of things. So as you can see, there's a lot of muscles involved in a balanced posture. It's not just about strengthening one muscle, it's about training the body properly. And this is a plumb line point of reference that this is a person who would be considered to have ideal posture. Now, very few people are perfect. However, you want to be as close to ideal as you can. And the further away from ideal you are, the more chronic issues you're going to have. And you are going to be shorter, and you're going to have pain patterns and all kinds of things that happen the further away from this ideal that you are. So here are the curves in the spine, and that I mentioned in the video that talk about, or I do mention coming up, how this makes your back or your spine 8 times stronger than it would be if it was straight. I always mention those little tiny spindly chair legs on antique chairs that don't look like they could possibly hold a person that weighs 200 pounds, but they can, because the curves make it stronger. It's a physics thing. So you want the neck to have a lordosis. It curves in. The thoracic spine has a kyphosis. It curves out. Lumbar is a lordosis, curves in, and sacrum is a kyphosis. It curves out. Now, the goal here is, you've probably heard kyphosis and you think, oh, that's a terrible thing. It just describes the type of curve. Now, do you have an excessive kyphosis, right? Do you have what would be called a dowager's hump, and this was increased? Or do you have a flattened T-spine and you've lost curvature? Do you have an increased lumbar where it's like a sway back, or a flattened lumbar? And I mentioned this coming up, right? So the thoracic spine can be called the silent saboteur, because if this curve, this kyphosis, is not ideal, now it doesn't matter, if it's 38 degrees, 42 degrees, that's not a big deal. But we're talking, look, this is really a loss of curvature. Well, if that thoracic spine has lost this much curve, look what it does to the neck. It kind of flattens the neck a little too, and it flattens the low back a little too. I mean, it's just not good all the way around from the head to the tail. And then if it's increased, look what happens. You get that wicked forward head. You get kind of a swayed lumbar, and it's just not healthy. So you really want to be balancing your posture with all of the muscles that are involved. It's not just your abs. It's not just your power source. It's not just your upper back extensors. It's not just your neck flexors, right? It's everything. And if it's not correct, what happens? That head goes forward. These muscles are designed to take about 10 to 15 pounds of pressure. But when it goes forward, it becomes 20, 30, 50, 60 pounds of pressure on these muscles. Talk about upper traps that are screaming at you. So it's really important to have healthy posture, but it's not all that simple to understand how best to train the body to restore healthy posture if it's missing. So hopefully you'll enjoy the rest of this when I show you how to move and how to train, at least how to start training. All right, see you in the movement. So you've seen the anatomy pictures. I've explained a little bit about the postural curves and what goes on in the neck and the trunk and the low back and the pelvis. So you've got a little better understanding. I want to explain a little bit more. So what happens is your bones are the slave of muscle, which means my bones would be laying on a pile on the floor if my muscles weren't attached, moving them. Yes, how your body moves is determined by the shape of the bones and how the joints meet each other, because they're going to only allow a specific type of a movement. If you get into the complexity of the foot and ankle and you study the subtalar joint, you'll understand what I'm saying. The ankle can only go in certain directions based on how those bones align and how they move when you initiate movement. However, no movement would occur without muscles. And when you have areas of the body like the spine, where the muscles are pretty much sort of holding your posture, then it's really important to train the muscles to improve the posture. Now, yes, there are some bony issues that can occur, right? We can have some alignment issues. Maybe people have been injured, may have had surgeries, may have had fusions, and motion isn't going to occur where there's a fusion, although now we've got excess motion occurring above and below the fusion, but I don't want to get off on that tangent. A lot of the times a fusion ends up needing a fusion above or below that segment because that movement is required in the spine throughout, from the neck to the pelvis. So what can we do to train our bodies to improve our posture? Now, I do have another video on here that talks about posture and mentions, getting shorter and those kind of things. And I teach a little bit on how to load and how to do a few things that can help improve posture. I wanted to sort of expand on that in this video and not just repeat that. So if you haven't seen that one, please watch that one. But for this, I want to teach you why it matters so much and what you can do about it, right? It's not just about, okay, I gotta stand up straight. I gotta sit up straight, right? When I was a kid, that's all our parents told us. Sit up straight, stand up straight, sit up straight, stand up straight. In my other video, I talked about that, right? Now everybody's like this, especially if they're sitting. Oh my goodness, a nightmare watching young people wait for their parents when they would come into the clinic for a PT session. Those kids would be in the chair and they'd be all hunched over and I can't imagine how many hours they're doing that. And yes, by the time they're an adult, they're going to have some postural issues for sure, unless that gets addressed, right? But let's talk about what you can do now to improve your posture if there's a lack of a healthy posture, or maybe prevent poor posture as you age, because that is a big fear. A big fear of people is ending up all stooped over, right? So you're going to want to address the curves of the spine, but how the muscles attach and how they impact those curves. So if you remember the anatomy pictures that I showed you, right? You have your neck, obviously, where the curve goes in. You have your trunk where the curve goes out. You have your low back where the curve goes in, and then the pelvis, the curve goes out. Now the pelvis, the sacrum specifically, that lower end of the spine, isn't really going to, that curve, you're not going to really be able to change, right? Because that's sort of fuses it at a certain age. But the other curves you can impact. Now, we don't want excessive curve and we don't want flattened curves. We want healthy curves. And those healthy curves are what allow us to have our head over our shoulders and not have an excessive sway back or flattened back. This isn't about tucking your tail between your legs and going into a posterior pelvic tilt. This isn't about going into an anterior pelvic tilt and really arching the low back. This isn't about trying to force the curves to improve. Because if that were the case, you wouldn't have to do any training, right? So let's train the muscles to improve the curves. So how do we do that? Well, first you have to sort of figure out, have you lost some curve or do you have excessive curve? And I know some of this is subjective and you're not trained in any of this, and I'm not asking you to become experts in postural curves. But, you know, you may be well aware if you've got a sway back or if you've lost the curve and you've got a flattened back. Typically, if you have a flattened low back, your glutes aren't really very well formed or rounded. You kind of have a flat bottom, typically, because that means you've been doing a lot of sitting, whether you drive truck or bus or cab or Uber, or you've been sitting at a desk your whole life, and then when you come home, you sit as well. Yeah, you're gonna lose that lumbar curve, and the glutes are gonna be flattened because you haven't been using them much, right? You sit on something, it kind of stops working. So that said, if that's the case, you're gonna wanna do things that help to increase the curve. You're gonna wanna train your muscles in a way where that curve kind of returns, right? So how would that happen? Well, that would happen with doing a lot of glute work. We want max to be working, gluteus maximus. We want to be doing those squats where we're really loading max, right? Where I'm going down and back, I'm keeping my knees against the chair so that my backside is loading when I do those squats, versus my quads really doing a lot of work because my knees are going over my toes. So that's important, right? We then would want to make sure that we can stand up nice and straight, because if those hip flexors in the front, from all that sitting, if those hip flexors kind of get stuck and you struggle a little bit to stand up straight because they don't want to get longer because they've been short for how many hours a day, then we're going to want to open up the hips and get them loading well. And remember, loading means that we're eccentrically loading a muscle. We're getting it to lengthen under tension. If I had a dumbbell in my hand right now, this muscle's getting longer under tension to control that. We want this to be able to do the same thing, to get longer under tension so we can stand up nice and straight. So you would want to do things that load the front of that hip. And if it's really tight, you want to start off easy. So you're going to have your feet in a little bit of a stride position. And so now this side is going to work more. And you can just kind of inchworm forward a little bit. Now there's a way to do this in 3 planes, but because I try to keep these videos relatively short so you'll watch them and do the work, we're going to stick with just sagittal plane right now, where we're just going forward and back. But the goal here is to really load that hip muscle in a way that it is successful, that it's not screaming at you, it's not pulling your low back, it's not saying, I don't like this, I hurt, stop doing this to me. You want success, right? You want to feel like that movement feels good, and it's loading, unloading, loading, unloading. And then of course you would do the same on the other side, right? Loading, unloading, loading, unloading. So that's a great way to help if you've done a lot of sitting and that low back is flat. Well, what happens if that low back has an increased curve and you're kind of a sway back? Well, what's going on there? Things are pulling there, right? And kind of getting you down, right? So we don't want that. Sometimes people have that because they're kind of hanging out on their hip flexors and they're sort of, you know, bent back like this. I see this a lot in people where they just sort of hang out here. Well, now what's happening is we want to get those muscles a little bit stronger, and we want to stop hanging out on them, right? We want to balance things around. So you've got to sort of figure out what's going on. Is your curve too much? Is your curve not enough? And then you want to work the muscles around those curves to improve it, right? Moving up into the trunk. If your trunk has too much curve, if you've got that forward head and you're kind of rounded out up there, well, now you want to improve extension. And if you've watched any of my shoulder videos, you know that when you go to get full flexion of your shoulder, it requires extension of the upper spine. I can only come here until, and I can't even push it. That's about it. But if I lift up and extend my upper spine, I can go a lot further, as you can see, right? So if you've got some shoulder issues, improving thoracic spine is huge, but we're talking posture here today. So if you're this, you want to be this, you want to do extension. And I had showed a video, like I said, on posture that helps to do that, but we're going to do it a little bit different in this one. And so what you would do is you would rest your hands on your chest, and you're going to first, let's load into the position your body's used to being in, because then it's kind of like, you know, if a drawer gets stuck, you push it all the way in to get it back on track, and then it pulls out nicely. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into that little bit of flexion where you're sort of bending at the waist and bringing your elbows in. And so you're kind of giving it some ease. And then you're going to lift up so that the chest comes up toward the ceiling and your arms come up and your head and shoulders go back. Now, you can do this with arm swing as well and get a little more out of it. So you're coming down here, you're kind of hunching, feeling that trunk, and then you come up, get those arms up high, chest comes up toward the ceiling, and you're going for that extension. So you're going to get more extension here, right? So when I come this way, I'm loading the back of the spine. When I come this way, I'm loading the front of the spine, or front of the body. But you're going to get that beautiful load and unload, and you get that on both sides, and it's going to help to balance that out, right? And those two curves tend to be the biggest culprits. And when you improve that thoracic spine curve, if it's too much, guess what? Your neck position improves and your head comes back where it belongs, right? Because now your thoracic spine, your lumbar spine, doesn't have the increased curve or the flattened curve. It's got a nice healthy curve. So because of that nice healthy curve, the trunk is now positioned better over the pelvis, and then you improve the curve in the thoracic spine, and voila, your head comes back to where it belongs. Now, yes, there are some other muscles that you can work. I'll try to post some more videos on this, but this is a really good starting point for you. So if you like this video, please hit the like button, subscribe if you're not subscribed, and let me know how you make out. Let me know, oh my goodness, I'm taller. I'd love to hear that. All right, we'll see you next time.